Hello, Jason.
Hi, Victor.
Warm welcome to our viewers here on CA Lab today. And today our topic is dementia. Are you at risk? And so, Jason, you are very experienced in this area. I know you have a long history with your organization. Can you share with us a bit more today on what is dementia, who is at risk, and how are we affected by this?
Okay. Dementia is actually a condition of the brain that results in what they call, a medical term called cognitive impairment. But in layman's term, it means memory loss or a reduced mental ability. So dementia used to be an age-related condition, which means as you get older, the risk of getting dementia gets higher and higher. So at 65, it's supposed to be 10%, 1 in 10. At 85, it rises to 1 in 2, 50%. So as we live longer, the risk of getting dementia becomes higher and higher. And that is why I think with people now living till 90 plus, the number of people getting dementia is actually on the rise. But other than that, what is really worrying is that recently, in the last 4 or 5 years, people younger are getting dementia. People below the age of 60. It's a condition called young onset dementia, YOD. And the doctors are actually very confused why it's affecting people younger. And it's very sad when you have dementia at the age of 50 or early 50s because it's a long journey. If you get it at 85, you're probably not working. There's no loss of income and things like that. But when you get it at 50, you probably will not be able to work because the condition affects you. Your spouse will probably have to get a job if he or she is not working to support the family. Kids will still be in school, and all your friends are all still working. So there's no one to hang out or be with during the day. So for people with YOD, they actually get quite depressed because first thing is they are upset why this condition is affecting them at this age, right at the prime of or peak of their career. And then there's no one to basically be with them because the family is busy and friends are working. And so this depression actually, in a way, might result in the condition actually deteriorating faster than someone who is older. So we are seeing that, we really don't know for sure, but we are seeing people with YOD actually deteriorating faster than someone who gets it at the age of 85 or 80. Yeah.
That's quite interesting because when I was doing some background reading to prepare for our conversation, right, a lot of the articles or the recent ones I read often refer to this as a age-related condition, and so therefore it's relevant to an aging population in Singapore, right? As our population progresses, so I was quite piqued my interest to find out that there is this young onset that you just mentioned. And I know that this matter is not to be taken lightly, right? This is a serious health condition that may impact a lot of people. But even often for myself, right, when I get prone to forgetfulness, I might anecdotally say, "Ayo, maybe it's early onset of dementia." I mean, anecdotally, right? I realize it's not something to be taken lightly, right? So now that you have made us aware that it is not necessarily age-related, are there some factors that might make people a bit more prone to this? Is there something that even younger people should be looking out for?
Like I said, actually the numbers, if you compare the numbers of people who are older with dementia versus the young onset, it's still, the majority are still the elderly lah. I mean, at the moment now, I think recently the press reported that in Singapore there are about 75,000 people who have dementia. But when we look at the population with young onset, I think it's about 3,007. That was the last number that was reported. So it's still a small number compared to the number of people who have dementia. So a lot of them are still the elderly who have the condition. The younger ones are still a small group. But like I say, it's just the impact on the younger ones it's higher because they lose their jobs and the family cannot really help them in that way lah. So for us, basically, the message is that yes, dementia doesn't necessarily be an age-related condition now. Even if you're younger, you could have it. Um, why younger people are getting it, they haven't really found out yet. But one doctor shared with me, it could be the lifestyle that we are leading. Right, we eat differently from our parents. We are on the mobile phone all the time. The stress at work is so much higher than our parents' time. So all this could be a reason why younger people are getting dementia, although they haven't really confirmed it.
So there might be some links to lifestyle or certain health conditions that you may already have. It's just that the research has not turned up anything conclusive in that area.
Actually, lifestyle has already been a factor for a long time, Victor. Um, through the many years of studies and research that has been done on dementia, lifestyle is definitely one that can actually increase the risk of dementia. So what doctors have actually reported is things like obesity, smoking, alcohol consumption, isolation. That means you don't mix around, you hang out, you stay at home and keep to yourself. All these can actually lead to dementia. But why is it affecting the younger people? That's the big question. These are all factors that are more for the elderly. So that's why the government is so focusing on so much focus is on active aging, because you need somehow or other there is a link between what the doctors say, what is good for your heart seems to be also what is good for your mind. So that seems to be like watching your diet, exercising regularly. But for dementia, there's more than just that. What the heart is good for your heart, lah. You really should keep up your social activities. Meet up with friends, which is a lot of our elderly don't do, lah. They actually sit at home on the TV a lot of times. They're isolated. And the other thing is to challenge your brain. Watching TV doesn't challenge your brain at all, right?
That's
So,
how I watch.
yeah. So they always say, learn a new musical instrument, learn a new language, challenge your brain on things like that so that, just keep it active.
I've got a question, but it wasn't something that you already mentioned. Does the quality and the duration of sleep impact this?
There are some studies which seem to show that sleep deprivation or poor sleep quality actually could lead to dementia. Although I don't think it's clinically proven yet that there is a link. But I think there are some studies that seem to suggest that there is an impact.
So now that we are also leaning towards a bit talking about the early or the young onset of dementia, what are some of the tangible, more obvious symptoms that people should be aware of? Something to look out for so that they know that it might be leading to something that they should be concerned about.
Okay. A lot of my friends ask me, hey, I think I'm getting a bit worried nowadays because I forget where I put my car keys. I forget a lot of things nowadays, and walk into a room, I forget like, hey, why am I here for? Is that really dementia? Well, I told them that this is all actually part of aging. As you get older and you're preoccupied with work and all that, you tend to forget things a lot. But actually, dementia is a lot more serious than that. For example, recently a friend shared with me that the dad got into his car and couldn't start the car. He called his son at work and said, hey, something wrong with my car, it can't start. And the son said, have you really checked it? He says, yeah, I don't know why. I drove it yesterday, it was fine. Today it won't start. So they said, can you come and take a look? So the son got off work, came home to see what's wrong with the car. And the dad was actually putting his foot on the accelerator, but he didn't press the button to start the car. So that is something. Then so when this friend related that to me, I said, you have to worry a little bit. I think you better observe your dad, because for someone not to remember to press the button to start the car, unusual, right? Because that's something that you normally wouldn't even have to think about when you get into the car. Another friend of mine who is in her 60s was sharing with me that sometimes when she drives home from work, she suddenly blacks out and can't remember the way home. So she has to stop the car and try to recall what's the way, how to get home. And so those are things that you would normally be kind of automatic for you. But if you have to think about it and stop, or you can't remember, then that worries. That's worrying, lah. But unfortunately, right, dementia has 3 stages: mild, mild, moderate, and severe. So the mild early stage of dementia is when you are generally quite okay, but bouts of forgetfulness sets in and things like that. Unfortunately, my worry is that when you get to the point where you don't know how to start your car, or you can't remember your way home, you are actually slightly past the very early stage. You're already into a little bit of it because you don't realize. You keep thinking, "Oh, I'm just being forgetful. I'm just busy at work. I'm not sleeping well." So I think all this is affecting causing me to be forgetful. But once you get to the point where you can't remember things that you normally wouldn't have to worry about and think about, then I think it's a bit into it. Yeah.
I think those two stories that you shared, I think are potentially quite disconcerting. I can only imagine that if I were in the position of that son to go home to find his father under those circumstances, I think I would be a bit triggered and worried, right? So obviously, the onset and also the having dementia itself impacts that individual, but probably also impacts the immediate family and the caregivers, right? What are some of the issues in terms of the interactions between someone who has dementia and his or her caregiver? Because just to give you some context to my question, I can only imagine that sometimes when we are not even familiar with the condition, the son might have been a bit irritated or annoyed. Hey, how can you do this? Or that the reactions from the immediate family members or the caregivers may not come with that context of understanding the impact of dementia, right? So, what are some of these things that we should look out for, that we should educate ourselves so that we know how to approach these situations with the appropriate sensitivity?
Yeah. Recognizing the symptoms of dementia, of course, is important, so that you know that, like for example, this example of the son going home and then finding that the dad didn't know how to start the car. You're perfectly right, Victor. I think any normal person will start shouting at the dad and says, "What's wrong with you?" Right?
Yeah.
I had to leave my office. I dropped everything and I came back, and you're sitting in the car and you forgot to press the button to start the car. I think the natural reaction for the son is that he'll be very upset. But if you know the symptoms of dementia, like I said, then you think, "Hey, something is not right with my dad. Maybe I should get him checked up, go for a diagnosis. Is there something wrong, or is it just a passing phase? He's not been sleeping well, or, it's not something that we have to worry about." But I think it's important to recognize the symptoms early, get it diagnosed. If it is really dementia, there is medication available that can slow down the condition. And also, if the person is fully engaged every day or most days, it can also slow down the deterioration. So it's important to recognize the symptoms early, get it diagnosed, get the what we call the medication in, get the activities for the person so that you maintain. But the impact on the family is actually quite hard for a person with dementia, because a lot of people think that dementia is just memory loss. It is definitely memory loss, but there are persons with dementia who actually have behavioral issues where their behaviors and personality change. So they can become abusive, they can become violent, and they could be perfectly fine before, but suddenly there's this change because of dementia. And those are the cases that the families and the caregivers, family caregivers, find it very hard to care for because they are violent and they keep abusing you and things like that. And then you get upset. But through some caregiver training programs that we run, we basically educate the caregiver that this reaction or behavior that you are seeing, it's not your dad or your mom or your husband or your wife. It's the condition that's affecting them. So you have to keep reminding yourself that, don't get upset. We also say don't confront them head on because sometimes they talk about things that are completely illogical. And then the family member gets upset and says, why are you talking nonsense, And then you start arguing. But to the person with dementia, that thought is as clear as real, to the person, this is real. I know it for sure. But to the family members, it's like, this is cannot be correct, and then you argue about it. So we always tell caregivers, in order not to create a problem or a dispute, just go along with it sometimes. So a lot of caregivers tell us, we lie all the time, but it's part of diffusing the condition, right? So we even tell helpers, domestic helpers who are hired to take care of an elderly with dementia. I said, if they tell you, I haven't eaten lunch, why are you not cooking and lunch for me when they actually just had lunch half an hour ago? Don't argue and say, hey, half an hour ago you ate, you had fish for lunch, you had this one, because they can't remember. And to them, it's very clear that I didn't have lunch and you didn't serve me lunch. So we always tell the helpers, if you get into a situation like this, just tell them, give me half an hour. I'll go and prepare lunch now. It'll be ready in half an hour. And within half an hour, they've forgotten again. And then they must ask again, and then they move on. So a lot of times, you just have to go along with it, tell some lies sometimes, but it's just a way of coping with the condition and caring for them.
No. Thank you for sharing that. As you were, giving us these tips, right? I really suddenly thought of a friend, and actually, I'm quite close to him. I forget that I often talk to him about this. His mother is in her 90s. So I want to take this chance to shout out to this friend of mine. I shan't name him here, but his initials are OY, and he's probably touching 60 soon. His mom is in her 90s, and very recently, he came to borrow a portable mahjong table from me because his mom was warded for another condition. But I think the family is very clear that her dementia is setting in quite severely. And he is actually the youngest of the children, so obviously probably the more favored child. And he makes it a point to be playing mahjong with her every weekend. And I think they've been doing this for 30, 40, maybe even 50 years, right? To be engaging his mom over mahjong over the weekend. And then even in her current state, probably with more severe set of dementia, she's still able to play mahjong. But often my friend OY does tell me a bit more about the difficult episodes that he might have to face. And then he would say that he would have to adjust his conversations with his mom, very much like what you have just described. Not really lying, but to be able to engage her in the way so that she doesn't feel so frustrated, because there is already frustration. Like you said, they may have forgotten they had done certain things and even forgotten that the meal time has passed, right? So it's actually, I think, you maybe realize that there is a very strong, even a psychological element to this. Right, both for the afflicted and the caregiver, right? The caregiver needs to make some necessary adjustments to the way that they engage, to the temperament, right, that they carry, to the words that they use, the tone that they use, so that it's just better for everybody, right? And it made me realize that actually it's no mean feat. It's not a small effort. So actually, I'm very proud of my friend. I'm gonna make him watch this episode of CA Lab. He still hasn't returned me my mahjong table. So, and so that also brings me to this point, right? You already mentioned a couple of things about staying engaged, and then some of that considerations towards the delaying the onset. You earlier mentioned that one important thing is to be cognitively engaged, right? Because this is a cognitive aspect, learning a skill, learning something new. That's something, and I often read a lot of articles about how music engages the brain in terms of coordination, hand-eye, like kind of cognitive engagement. So there's music, new skill, new languages. You mentioned that. You also mentioned about staying socially engaged. So not just dealing with a screen all the time. Then you also mentioned that there are some medications, right? That I suppose there will be appropriate times of which medication might be necessary to delay the onset. So these are the various, like lifestyle to medicine related uh, uh, ways to approach delaying or to managing dementia. Maybe can you give us more details and more color as to how are these things advancing over time? Are there advances in medicine and research that would help us manage this better?
In terms of medication, Victor, it is definitely advancing quite significantly recently. There are a couple of drugs already in the market that the doctors always prescribe. Unfortunately, it doesn't work all the time for everyone. That has always been the difficulty about the medication for dementia. As doctors always share with me that all our brains are wired so differently that it's so hard to find something that works for everyone. So what we have in the in the market today, it helps for some. Some caregivers share with us that it's not helping. So, but we said, well, try as best you can, lah. But a recent report that came out, or recent news that has hit us recently, is that a couple of good, supposedly very good drugs that can really slow down the progress of dementia or even stabilize it completely are being trialed and tested in the US. We are still hoping that the testing will be successful because they have to do it on a very wide scale just to make sure that there's no side effects and that really is effective before it gets released and approved into the market. We are hopeful. We will always keep our fingers crossed that there is something that can work. Even better if one day we can find a drug that can reverse the condition completely, and then basically I can close shop and because then you just have to take a pill or a couple of pills and then you will be okay. But up to now, I think it's still a bit quite a distance before we can actually find a cure. But I think this couple of drugs that we know of is actually hopefully coming into the market maybe in the next 6 months or a year. We're hopeful and we are hoping that it will help. But so that's the medication front of it. In terms of the social, like you said, what I shared with you about how we should get them engaged and all that, I think we're trying to do as much as we can to create options for people with dementia. For a long time, Victor, if you have dementia, the only solution or only care that the doctors will recommend to you is go to a daycare center. But daycare centers are not really that suitable for people with early stage dementia because you are actually 60-70% still all right. You are just a bit forgetful. And when you walk into a daycare center, a dementia daycare center, everyone is like in the moderate severe stage of dementia, and a lot of them are quite old, and that's why the young onset refuse to go to a dementia daycare center because they said everyone here is so old. I'm 20 years younger. I can't fit into that. So for a long time, it was only dementia daycare. There was nothing else for the persons with dementia. So over time, my organization has actually tried to create options for people other than the daycare. So we actually have programs that we run in the community that you can go to, whether it's a library, art gallery, and you might have read about some things. We have worked with art gallery to create sessions for people with dementia, maybe on, like, say, a Wednesday morning when the gallery is quite quiet or the museum is quite quiet. Have it friendly, train the docents there and train the people who are running the programs there on how to handle people with dementia, so that caregivers can know that, oh, on Wednesday morning, if I feel like bringing my family member who has dementia to the museum to have a look around and all that, I don't feel that I'm going to be stuck, or things will get quite difficult or out of hand. So we are trying to create all that. So we even have sessions, kind of activities in cafes. So what we do is we work with cafes to allow us to use their space when they're not busy. Like, for example, in the mid-afternoon, like 2 o'clock, after lunch and before dinner. And what we do is we bring maybe a person who can sing quite well, or a drummer in, and then we have that in the cafe, and it's great. The caregiver says, it's so fun because they most of the time caregivers are actually quite fearful to bring a person with dementia out into the open, or into the public space, because sometimes they act up. There are sometimes, like, children with autism, they just start raising their voices or start shouting and wanting to walk around a little bit, and then people look at them and wondering, what's wrong? What's going on here? And actually, it's even worse for people with young onset dementia, because the caregivers were sharing with us that if you're an elderly person and you act a little bit odd, people will say, well, maybe this person has dementia. But when you're young, like 50, and you act strangely, people wonder, are you trying just to be, to be strange? So a caregiver was sharing with us, the husband was with her, and the husband, I think, was like 52 years old. They were walking on the street. He bumped into someone, and the guy turned around and looked at him and says, what's wrong with you? Why can't you walk properly? But people with dementia do actually have problems sometimes with their balance and the way their directions and things like that. So sometimes they do strange things like this, like bumping into people, and so it's very sad that sometimes caregivers are worried about bringing their person with dementia out in the community, into the public space, so they don't get to go out at all, and this leads to that isolation that I talked about at home. So for us, we are trying our very best to create as many programs and services as possible, whether it's in a center, whether it's out in the community. Just create options so that if you have dementia, I always say, it's not the end of the world for you. There are things that you can still do. There are things that you cannot do, but that's fine. Accept it and move on. But, look at the things that you are still able to do and carry on living life as purposeful and as normal as you can.
Thank you, Jason. I think it sounds like Dementia Singapore is doing a lot, right, in this area. So I think we need to do a special shout out to the work that's done by. But before I go into that, I'm curious. I understand that we are both chartered accountants, ISCA member. I was going through your LinkedIn, and I think you did a transition into Dementia Singapore. I'm curious. Can you tell me more about how did you find yourself into this space?
Actually, Victor, I have been connected with this organization for 34 years, since the start of the organization. I was working in an audit firm. This group of doctors, this was in 1990. I was only in my second year or third year in my career. This group of doctors realized that this problem of dementia was actually growing in Singapore. There were more people being affected by dementia. And one of the incidents that actually the doctors felt really very worried about was actually there were a few elderly people who were found wandering on the streets, lost. When the authorities picked them up, there was no identification on them. So you didn't know who they were, and because they had quite severe dementia, they couldn't even tell people where they live, what even their names. They couldn't even remember their names. So they actually put them up in a shelter for a while, and when they couldn't figure out where where to bring this person back to, they actually put some advertisements in the newspaper to say that this person, with a photograph, to say that this person is lost. Do you know him or her? The families never came to claim them. It was actually neighbors who called up and said, "Hey, I know this uncle. He stays in my block on the second floor." So the authorities brought them back and told the family, "Did you not see that this advert in the newspapers that your dad or your mom, was lost?" He said, "Actually, it was us who pushed them out onto the streets because we didn't know how to care for them anymore. They were creating a big problem at home. We went everywhere to look for help, wanted to put them in a nursing home, wanted to put them, in some homes. Nobody wanted to accept them because of their condition. So we just gave up. We didn't know what to do anymore. So we took all the identification of them and pushed them out into the street, hoping that someone will take them in and care for them." And so this group of doctors, when they read that, they realized that something needs to be done. So they came up and formed this organization, went to the Ministry of Health, and Ministry of Health said, "Yes, we do realize that there's a growing number of people with dementia in Singapore. What help do you need?" As the doctor says, "Yeah, can you give us some funding to start a daycare center or start some help to support people with dementia?" They say, "Yeah, sure, but can you show us some numbers?" The doctor says, "Oh, numbers, that's not something that we are very good at." So Ministry of Health says, "Then you better go and look for someone who can do numbers, maybe an accountant, to help you, come up with some budgets and forecasts." And then that's how they found me. They called one of the partners of the firm that I was working with, and the partner said, "Oh, sure, we have a whole firm full of accountants, and I think I must be the one who was walking past his office when he put down the phone. He called me in and says, 'Can you go and talk to this group of doctors and see what help they need?' I told this partner, I said, 'I have no idea about dementia.' He says, No. They know all about dementia. They don't need you to know about dementia. They just need your help with the finances, with the forecast, and doing some budgeting for them." I said, "Okay, no harm. I'll go and just talk to them." She said, "I'm going to talk to them. If it doesn't work out, then never mind, but just at least meet up with them." So I did meet up with them. And I was actually very impressed that these doctors who are actually, some of them were still working in the hospital, some of them were in private practice. But I was just very impressed that they were giving up their spare time to do this when they're still holding their day jobs. So I came back, talked to my wife. I said, "I guess if the doctors can do that, I think maybe I should give it a try and help them." So I said, "Okay." And so they put me onto the board, and I was made a treasurer of that time it was called Alzheimer's Disease Association. I was a treasurer, and I was helping them set up the organization, set it up all the services, and doing all the finance functions as a volunteer. So what they will do is the bookkeeper that we hired would come to my office with a bunch of checks, ask me to sign, and things like that. So I'll just do it. And some weekends I will go down and try to make sure that the books are in order and things like that. So that happened. Every couple of years, when I tell the doctors it's time for me to move on, I think, you find somebody else to take my role. They say, "No, don't go, stay, because, nobody wants to help us. There's nobody who wants to come and volunteer. We need you, and you're doing good work. Just stay on." So I stayed on, and I was there for 22 years on the board. And so happened, the company I was working for actually closed operations, and I lost my job actually. So I was actually looking for another job. And when this group of doctors, this was in 2012. So 1990, I joined them as a board member. 2012, when I was in between jobs, looking for somewhere else to work, they came up to me and said, "Would you consider coming to work full time with us? The organization has grown, and I think we really need someone strong in the corporate functions like HR, IT, finance to come in." So I said, "Wow, that's a big a decision," because crossing over to the charity is a big change and also a big pay cut for me. So I said, I got to think about this. I got to talk to the family about it. They said, yeah, just talk and see whether. So I spoke to the family, and my wife said, I think your last job was so stressful. You were traveling quite a bit. You were on the phone at night because it was a US company. Said maybe it's time to slow down and do something different. Why don't you just give this a try? So I said, okay, lah, maybe we'll give it a try. So I told the board, I'll try it for 2 years. If it doesn't work, then I'll go back to my corporate world. But it's been 12 years now. It's a lot more meaningful. It's not an easy role. Charities are very lean, and I always share with people when I was working in the corporate world, in the banks and all that. I used to have an army of people that I can help me out. Here, there's hardly anybody to help you out. Sometimes when I got a piece of work, I walk around. Oh dear, everyone's so busy. Okay, I do myself, lah. So that's how charity is, lah. And and I get frustrated sometimes because there's funding issues, there's pressures and KPIs from the government because you receive funding and you receive help from them. But I tell my wife every time I get frustrated, all I need to do is go down to one of our centers. I look at the people that we're helping. I talk to the caregivers, and I realize that whatever I'm doing is helping them. Before that, in the corporate world, I'm not sure who I'm helping because all the hard work goes somewhere, but I don't really get to see where it goes to. But here I can really see, and I see caregivers coming up to me to thank me for helping them, and I think that brings a lot of meaning into the work that I'm doing.
Thank you, Jason. The sharing is very inspiring. That it's actually a very long commitment that you've had. No, but I really want to thank you, Jason, for this sharing. It's inspiring. It's also um, very eye opening for me to hear about your journey transitioning from a very stressful corporate environment moving into the charity sector, which, as you mentioned, it comes with its own set of burdens and stress and obligations, right? Because you have to be responsible and accountable for the funding. Um, and so, I do hope that through your sharing and through this episode of CA Lab, that our deepened understanding of this not just helps us in terms of our own awareness of dementia and its impact, but also how, if we want to contribute, we are able to partner with Dementia Singapore if we want to, together with your programs.
Yeah.
So perhaps as a closing remark, is there anything that you want to let our viewers know in terms of how you want us to be aware of how we can contribute in this area?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely. I mean, I was really very pleased when Pauline approached me to get on this podcast. I mean, I've been a member of ISCA, and I've always wondered, how I could work more closely with ISCA, um, and somehow or other, it never got connected until today when I'm now on a podcast and reaching out to my fellow members. It is really there's a lot that we can do together, and I really hope I can work and collaborate with ISCA on some of your CSR programs, and even for the fellow members, our fellow members, if there's something that you feel like you wanted to give back to society, just reach out to us. Happy to connect, even in either in your personal basis or in your at work. We do reach out to a lot of companies. We do lunchtime talks to try to create awareness of dementia, get corporate volunteers to come in to understand what we do, so that in their free time, if they want to volunteer, they can do it as well. So yeah, I really look forward to working more closely, and really getting a bit more help, in terms of trying to run this organization. But as a parting word, I think I would say, dementia is there. It doesn't choose who it affects. We have people who are very, very high, either even politicians, even ministers, even lawyers, even bankers who have dementia. We don't know why it happens. The doctors are still haven't got a clue how to prevent it. All we know is a risk reduction, like I told you about lifestyle changes to reduce the risk. But other than that, it can affect anybody. And when it affects somebody, as we also spoke about, Victor, it not only affects the person, but it affects the whole family trying to care for the person. So we always say that for every one person with dementia, there are another one or two more who are affected by it. And these are actually the caregivers who actually have to either give up work or change their whole lifestyle to care for the person with dementia. So if there's 75,000 people in Singapore with dementia, there's probably another 75,000 and more who are affected, who are the caregivers who have to care for them. So we try our best to lessen the burden and the stress on the caregivers. And so we do a lot of activity, a lot of programs and services as well to support caregivers, like support group meetings, respite care for the caregivers. So we, other than the persons with dementia, Dementia Singapore also looks after the caregivers.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you once again to Mr. Jason Fu, CEO of Dementia Singapore. And I hope that this episode of CA Labs Dementia, How It Impacts Us, gives us something to chew on. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Victor.
Jason.
Thank you.